Good evening. The meeting of the Rent Control Board is hereby called back to order after its closed session. There is one announcement I'll make very briefly. Anyone wishing to address the board on any specific item for tonight's agenda should have contacted the board secretary, Mr. Ho, prior to this meeting. If you'd like to make a public comment, feel free to request to do so in the chat function of the Blue Jeans, or you may dial this number, which I'll give you now. It's area code 408-740-7256. The meeting ID number is 183-969-339, and the passcode is 4766. We will, of course, recognize the speakers and arrange to have them speak when it's their turn in the queue. Right. May I have a report of closed session? Would the General Counsel please like to give a report on closed session?
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Commissioners. I'll report on the closed sessions from both January 19th and tonight, February 10th. The board recessed into closed session on January 19th and adjourned at 7:05 p.m. with no reportable action taken. The board recessed into closed session this evening and adjourned at 6:55 with no reportable action taken. And that's my report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Moving on to approval of the minutes. May I have a motion to approve the minutes for the board's last meeting?
So moved.
Okay, I believe that was Vice Chair Foster. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, Commissioner Sultan is the second. And now, may I have a roll call vote?
Yes, Commissioner Torosis.
Yes.
Commissioner Sultan.
Yes.
Vice Chair Foster. And Chair Duran.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, the minutes are approved. Now, moving on to item number 6, special agenda items. Do we have any brief announcements?
Yes, I have a few announcements this evening. First, I'd like to announce that the city did extend the eviction moratorium through June 30th. So this is for reasons other than non-payment of rent. And that, as I said, will stay in place either through June 30th or upon the lifting of the county health emergency order. I've also mentioned in the past about the funds that are available through California's COVID-19 rent relief program. And there are still funds available, so anybody who has been unable to pay rent from the impacts of COVID-19 should file an application for that program through Housing is Key. We've had close to 1,650 Santa Monica households assisted by that program, including an additional almost 100 in the last month. And more than $25.5 million has come to Santa Monica to help keep people safely and stably housed. So we encourage anybody who is in need to submit an application. They can do that by contact through the website at housingiskey.com or by calling 833-430-2122. And finally, I announced at the previous meeting that the Santa Monica's homeless count was coming up. That was delayed because of the Omicron virus. So that is now rescheduled for February 23rd, and they are still looking for teams of 3 or 4 people to assist with that block-by-block count. So anybody who's interested in joining that effort can find out more through the city's website at santamonica.gov. And that's all I have this evening.
Okay, thank you very much for that report. I'm going to move on now to the public comment. And for the audience there, this is the time set aside for members of the public to address the board on matters that are not included in our agenda, but that are within the subject matter jurisdiction of the board. Please note that the board can't take any official action on those items discussed, but we're happy to hear them. Secretary Ho, is there anybody for public comment?
No, there are no requests to speak during public comment. The one written communication was forwarded to the board.
Very good. Okay. Thank you very much. Then we will move on to the next item, which is jurisdictional items. The first one is an exemption, owner occupancy. It is number 1829.
Chair Duran.
Yes.
I'd like to make a motion that we take all the jurisdictional items, specifically the owner occupancy exemptions, under 10A together without a staff report, given the kind of de facto nature of what we're dealing with here.
Okay, there's a motion, and to be specific, the item numbers are 1829, 1830, and 1831. So there's been a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, there's been a first and a second.
So we're taking them together, and I didn't make a motion yet to approve them, so I think that I'll just amend the motion because it sounds like we're taking a vote now. We don't need to discuss, or do we want to make a second motion?
Okay. So my understanding was that is.
I move to take them together. I guess I will amend my motion together without a staff report, and then approve all three owner occupancy exemptions, given the fact that they've met the test pretty clearly here in the staff reports.
Okay, Commissioner Foster, do you still want a second?
Yep, that's friendly.
Okay, very good. Then may we have a roll call vote?
Yes, Commissioner Teroses.
Yes.
Commissioner Sultan.
Yes.
Vice Chair Foster.
Yes.
And Chair Duran.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, very good. Moving on to 10B1, which is a removal permit. It is case number 464R-C. The address is 2000 Washington Avenue, Unit 1001A. May we have a staff report?
Good evening, Commissioners. This is a removal permit for 2000 Washington Avenue, specifically Unit 1001A. When 2000 Washington Avenue was converted to condominiums through the TORCA law, it contained this bootleg unit, Unit 1001A, had been created without permits and had been carved out of Unit 2000 by essentially blocking a hallway, an interior hallway. And so this bootleg unit consisted of a bedroom and a bathroom. It did not contain any kitchen. The Antonia Bogdanovich, who's the current owner of the property and inherited this property from her mother, that after the 1994 earthquake, her mother, who then owned the property, demolished the rear stairs that used to come up and connect to Unit 1001A, and they were the way that you could get in and out of that unit, because those stairs had become rotten and had become dilapidated. She also said that construction of new stairs, after they were demolished, construction of the new stairs built to code, they found out, would violate the common area setback requirements that under the building code. And so they couldn't build it without violating the building code. So what her mother did was she reopened that interior hallway that had been blocked without permits, create the bootleg unit, in order for the people who would be living in the bedroom of 1001A to be able to get out. As I said, Ms. Bogdanovich inherited these units in 1998, and she has applied for a removal permit for the bootleg unit in order for it to be essentially reverted to its original use legally as part of Unit 2000. And because this unit never satisfied the building code's habitability requirements of a kitchen, and it doesn't have its own ingress and egress, and in fact creating one would be impossible without violating the building code's setback requirements, it cannot be made habitable. Staff therefore recommends that the board grant the removal permit application. And one other thing that I wanted to mention in this is that the Homeowners Association also submitted a letter in support of this application.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Council. I see a question regarding the staff report. Vice Chair Foster?
Apologies. I was ready for discussion. Are there any speakers?
There is, yes.
Looks like you're on the question.
Okay, so there's no questions regarding the staff report. There is a request to speak from the applicant, Antonia Bogdanovich. Secretary Ho, if you can set her up.
Actually, the speaker, Ms. Bogdanovich, is not with us at this meeting.
Okay. Okay. Well,
So just to clarify, there are no speakers on this item, Mr. Ho.
is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, very good.
Can I ask a question? Can I just ask a clarifying question of HACA really quickly before we start discussing?
Sure.
So,
yes,
is she making any attempt to put the units back together? Like it sounds like they were all one unit at some point.
They legally were built as one unit.
Yeah.
And then at some point, somebody closed an interior hallway and made this interior bootleg unit that you could only exit through these rear stairs that no longer are there into the backyard.
Right.
And then after those stairs were demolished after the Northridge earthquake, in order for you to be able to get out of the unit, they just unblocked the interior hallway, so it became one unit again. And what she's doing is actually just asking for a legalization so that the status is clear, so that it can be one legal unit that encompasses all the bedrooms.
Got it. Okay, thank you. That's what I wanted to just clarify. Okay, I don't have any other questions. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Any other commissioners, any other questions or discussion? Go ahead, Vice Chair Foster.
Yeah, I mean, just because we recognize the unit as a bootleg a long time ago, doesn't mean it's not part of her unit. It should have never been created that way in the first place because it was uninhabitable without a kitchen. No ingress, no egress seems very clear, and she's just trying to restore it to its original date. It's not rentable anyway to a rent-controlled tenant legally. So, and with the Homeowners Association in support, I mean, that sounds clear to me. I would move that we approve this removal permit.
Second.
Okay, very good. There's a motion. Is there anyone second?
Second.
Okay, second by Commissioner Terosis. If we're ready for a vote, Secretary Ho, we'll take a vote now.
Sure. Commissioner Terosis.
Yes.
Commissioner Sultan.
Yes.
Vice Chair Foster.
Yes.
And Chair Duran.
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right. Thank you very much, everybody. Moving on to item number 12, administrative items. We have Brian Augusta with us this evening to give a legislative report for the 2021 and the 2022 season. Mr. Augusta, whenever you're ready.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Commissioners.
Good evening.
Thank you for having me tonight. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. It's a pleasure to be here with you tonight. Kind of odd timing because, typically I come see you all after the bill introduction deadline, which is still about a week and a half or a little over a week away. And then come at the end of the year. And with COVID pandemic, the timing of all these conversations has been a little different. So last time I was in front of you was August, which was before the bill, before the time in which the governor would act on final bills. And then here I am tonight speaking with you before we get to the bill introduction deadline. So I'll likely want to come back and consult with the board after we see all of the bills that have been introduced. And of course, I'm in regular contact with your staff about those, but we may need to come back later in the year once we know the full picture. But tonight I wanted to talk about a few preliminary things, give you a preview of some of what we think is coming, and of course, hear any questions that you may have about sort of the year ahead or anything that's transpired since we were last together in August. The biggest thing of interest to the board and probably the audience watching tonight is Mr. Lee's Ellis bill, AB 854, which would have established 5-year holding period under the Ellis Act, meaning that a property owner could not access the Ellis Act to remove a property from the rental housing market unless they had owned the property for at least 5 years. And this is a bill that, or an idea, a policy that has been attempted in the past. Senator Leno from San Francisco had tried the bill several times previously. He was able, in one instance, to get it past the first house off the Senate floor by narrowing the bill to just be specific to his district, which is in San Francisco. And then that bill died in the Assembly Housing Committee. This year, Mr. Lee brought back his bill. He introduced it last year. It became a 2-year bill, which meant it didn't move out of the first house, didn't have a hearing in the first committee. So he had to get the bill out of committee and off the floor between the beginning of January, when the legislature, reconvened, and the end of January. So the bill, of course, was supported by tenants' rights groups and others who are very concerned about Ellis activity, by speculators who come in, buy a property, and immediately Ellis it. But it was opposed by the real estate industry, the realtors, the California Apartment Association, other regional landlord groups who believe that the Ellis Act should not be restricted in that manner. So it did get out of the Assembly Housing Committee with sort of on a party line vote, if you will, with Democrats supporting and Republicans opposed. But on the Assembly floor, it was never brought up for a vote. Now, whenever that happens, that a bill is on the floor and it's not brought up for a vote, it's a little difficult to know all the reasons. You certainly can't be assured of how close they were to getting the votes or not getting the votes. But we know from past experience on Ellis-related bills that have opposition from the real estate industry that very difficult to line up those votes. And so needing 41 votes by the deadline, the author decided not to bring up the bill. And so I think one of the takeaways from that is we've learned in the past that bills like 854, which are really have the most direct impact in jurisdictions that are that have a local rent control policy, right? And are and in fact in this bill they specifically limited it to those with a local policy. The rest of the legislature who represents cities or counties that don't have rent control, the bill would have no impact in their jurisdiction. So on the one hand, one might think they would support the bill, but with the opposition from the real estate industry, very likely to be persuaded by their arguments. And that's exactly what happened. So will we see this bill again this year? Perhaps. The bill introduction deadline, as I said, is still a year away. I wish, a week away. And we may see this reemerge this year or next. It being an election year makes things like this that are highly controversial that much more difficult. But this remains a persistent issue with a lot of concern about the loss of rent-controlled units in jurisdictions like Santa Monica, where the Ellis Act does essentially permit an investor to come in, buy an ongoing rent-controlled property that's occupied, evict the tenants, and remove the unit from the rental market, and we lose those controlled units forever. So I believe we'll continue to see this issue come up until there's some resolution of the balance between property owners' right to exit the rental market, who is in fact a rental property owner, and the desire to protect tenants from speculators who are using the Ellis Act to evade the local rent control policies and just cause evictions. So that's 8:54. You may have questions when we get to the end. I'm happy to entertain those. I want to switch to the budget, which is really the big conversation now in early January of things that are moving. And of course, something that I think is top of mind for all of you, which is extension and expansion of the emergency rental assistance programs at the state and local level that have largely helped provide support for tenants who would otherwise face potential eviction for non-payment of rent during the economic downturn from the COVID pandemic. Now, as you remember, we have had in place for some times, at state level, some eviction protections that sort of held the line of making sure that we didn't lose, that no one faced eviction who wasn't able to pay the rent. Those eviction protections largely disappeared at the end of last year in the fall when it was replaced by an enhanced rental assistance program that allows 100% payments to landlords to compensate them for anyone who has not been able to pay the rent, and swapped out those eviction protections for more of a enhanced procedural protections in court, which essentially required that when before a landlord could get the first step in the eviction process, a summons, and certainly before they could proceed to a final judgment in an eviction action, they had to show that they've applied for the rental assistance program and that the application is no longer pending. Either it's been denied or the application has been granted, and if it's been granted and it resolves the dispute, the case will be dismissed. Now, all of those things end on March 31st. And although every locally administered program differs, at the state level, there's a huge gap, and there's a huge gap at the local level as well. And so many people have been concerned about how we're going to fill that gap. State went back to the feds earlier in the year to get additional funding that had been clawed back from other states that hadn't used it. It was far short of what the state was asking for. And with the March 31st deadline looming and a huge gap between the need and the amount of resources, one important conversation in Sacramento has been how we're going to close that gap. So late last week, the legislature took what we call early budget action. They introduced a budget junior bill that is now moving to the governor to put the pieces in place to close those gaps. And essentially what we're doing is we're extending a loan to the state and local programs until we know how much more money comes from the feds, how much more money, what the full extent of the need is, of unmet need among renter households. And then when the federal money comes down, we will replace that money with the federal money. If there's a gap, we will close that gap with the general fund, with the significant surplus that we have. So that's the good news. The good news is we know that with that in place, we should be able to close any gap in assistance that's needed between now and March 31st for anyone who has applied. Troubling thing for many people is that there is nothing in the bill that would extend those enhanced eviction protections that I talked about. And we know from experience that that not everyone gets through the door as quickly as we need. And so come March 31st, will some people be left behind? How will we ensure that those who are left behind have some relief? And also we are facing the reality that the state is doing and locals are doing a tremendous job to get this money out the door, but it takes time to process the applications. And so March 31st will come and go, but it will be months before folks get a check. And so part of the conversation in Sacramento now is, how do we make sure that between the time that someone successfully applies and the money gets to them, that we don't see that household evicted? And that's going to be the remaining conversation between March 31st, between now and March 31st on that point. I would say also one other big thing, of course, is the governor's budget. You know, he puts out his January budget he puts out his initial budget in early January, and this year on the housing front, it included a number of investments, proposed investments. You know, we're a long way from a final budget. He introduces his budget. The legislature holds hearings on it. We get the tax receipts in April. We see his May revise, and then the final negotiated budget is passed in June. So this is really just sort of the initial conversation. But on the plus side, he has proposed an additional $500 million into the state low-income housing tax credit, some investments in the infill infrastructure grant program, and the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities program, two state programs that provide affordable housing financing that supports, among other things, infill development. Another $100 million to support the state's excess sites program, where the state is committing land to the production of affordable housing, and another $100 million for adaptive reuse. Now, the theme throughout the governor's budget is climate change, and that is why I think he selected a lot of these investments, because they sort of are focused on an infill strategy for reuse underutilized properties closer to transit, closer to the urban core. But there is a lot of conversation about what other investments we need to really elevate the conversation about how do we use this surplus to really transform the picture in the state for those that are in need of affordable housing. And so that's going to be part of the ongoing conversation in the months to come. And part of that is going to be what additional supports are needed for those tenants, for example, who are facing eviction or facing challenges paying their rent. What can we do to continue to support households to stay housed, stabilize them, and to provide the supports they need to close that gap, work it out with their landlord, and remain stably housed, as opposed to facing an eviction, going through the court process, and for most folks in an unrepresented manner without legal assistance, and eventually facing displacement, and for many households, homelessness. And so I know Commissioner Foster has a question, and I'm nearing the end, so I'll just wrap up there to say I think in the couple next week and a half to come, we're going to see the full picture of what's out there in terms of bills that have been introduced. We will also get a clearer picture on where the legislature is going on the budget. I hope to come back, talk to you about those developments and where the board is on some of those. So, Mr. Chair, let me pause there and see if you or the commissioners have any questions.
Thank you very much for your report. I did see Vice Chair Foster's hand up. Vice Chair Foster, and then Commissioner Trosis afterwards.
I'll be brief. So, along the lines of what you were just speaking on, you know, AB 1487 by Gabriel was vetoed. Eviction defense funding, a lot of us on this call even have been working on this issue for about 3 years, and it's been going on for many years before that, which is the right to counsel and an eviction defense fund. And what were the reasons given? I have two questions, so this is about this bill. What were the reasons given by the governor's office? I think the public should know for vetoing this bill.
Well, now you're testing my recollection of what was in the veto message, but I can tell you the real reason, which is that I think, and maybe he covered this in his veto message, but for a couple of governors now at least, when we see something like this, a policy bill that proposes something that only does the thing if it has money, the last two governors really not want to see those bills on their desk. If we're going to fund it, we have that conversation in the budget. And with respect to 1487's funding stream, that did not make the final cut. Now, there was other support for legal services programs and other legal assistance, but not the program that was envisioned in 1487. So the message there was, if you want this, you want to see it funded, we need to have that conversation in the budget. And my understanding is that advocates are continuing to push for that, and to make a long-term commitment to that sort of ongoing access to legal assistance.
So, I mean, isn't that known, though? Why did both houses go through the exercise of putting it through all the committees and all the votes and all the floor votes and passing it if they knew that unfunded programs aren't going to land? I mean, was that signaling on their part?
Are you asking me, or do you have a...
Well,
I will say that I see that a lot. I mean, I really don't know the motivation behind the really elevate an issue. If you put it on the governor's desk, that continues the conversation about the need. And I think that was undoubtedly a factor here.
Thank you. I just wanted to hear you say that. So AB 115, Bloom's bill died, housing and commercial zones. We're trying to find infill spots. Why did this bill die, in your opinion?
Well, I don't know all the reasons that 115 died per se, but I would say that there, among the elements, that there's been a conversation on every bill that involves streamlining of the local approval process, that labor is very concerned about losing the ability to negotiate fair wages for construction workers, and that's been an ongoing conversation with the building trades in Sacramento. And this bill was among many that that they expressed that concern about, that they wanted to see protections that would ensure a skilled and trained workforce. And the bill didn't move forward. It may be for that reason, it may be for others, but I would say that no bill that didn't have that language for which they had concerns moved forward last year. So that's part of the ongoing conversation in Sacramento as well.
Thanks. That's all I had.
Yeah, on that skilled and trained labor piece, I guess I'll just pick up where you left off, Mr. Augusta. My understanding is that that's also the reason why we can't get, and correct me if I'm wrong, the Comlogger, La Casa, LA County Housing Finance, whatever the acronym is. That's also the reason why we can't get that forward. And I do understand that the coalition of advocates in the city of LA put forward a potential ballot initiative that did negotiate skilled and trained labor language with our LAOC building trades, and that it potentially could be workable language in a model going forward to the statewide building trades. Is there any talk of reviving the Comlogger bill?
So you're speaking of SB 679, which would, as you said, create the local financing source in Los Angeles County that would fund affordable housing and preservation and tenant assistance. And yeah, that's an ongoing conversation. That's a bill that's supported by or sponsored by United Way LA, and obviously has a broad coalition behind it. I don't know why that bill has been essentially parked in the Assembly Housing Committee. I don't know all the reasons, but I'm sure that the labor conversation is part of it. I am confident that, particularly given that broad coalition, that's an ongoing conversation. I don't know if we'll see that vehicle move, but I suspect we may. If we don't, we will probably see another proposal around that.
Yeah, because I think the main issue that I'm seeing, obviously we're talking here on the Rent Control Board more about preservation, less about production, but whether you're talking about either, we don't have enough funding for it. And when you talk about things like right to counsel, we all know the outcomes are much, much better, especially for people of color, and it's typically the low-income people of color that are disproportionately affected by not having representation. There is no funding source for this at this point. So, either we get it in the budget as a budget ask, and it doesn't seem like anyone is doing that. And so I guess advocates, we need to go the budget route, or we get something at the local level to generate revenue to do some of this work. And if I understand correctly, La Casa would provide funding for a variety of items, including preservation of existing housing. So, just wanted to flag that as something I think we're interested in. And then I also wanted to ask a broader question too. Obviously Assemblymember Bloom, a champion on many different housing issues for us. He's going to be not seeking another term. And we lost Assemblymember Chu, our Attorney General Bonta. The people who typically carried housing bills in our legislature I'm seeing less bills and less creative ideas. Mm-hmm. Any idea as to who's going to step in here and fill the void?
Yeah, well, you named 3 authors with whom we have worked very closely over the years on a variety of housing issues and who have been huge champions on pieces of the 2017 housing package and 1482 and a lot of other important bills that we've seen in recent years. And so it is unfortunate to see those champions leave, but we are seeing others emerge. I think the one interesting thing about what you're asking about, Commissioner, is that we're also seeing a lot of members leaving the legislature.
Yeah.
We have 6 vacancies now, I believe, and a number of members who are now sitting in open seats, essentially. And so there's going to be a huge change next year. Of course, a lot of those folks are going to be first-time legislators, but the whole field is going to change. But with respect to who's there this year to finish out the work, I mean, obviously Assemblymember Wicks, who is the new Assembly Housing Chair from the East Bay, has been and will continue to be a champion. And Senator Wiener, obviously, is the Senate Housing Chair, is also an outspoken champion on housing issues. This year, Assemblymember Lee took on 854. He's also a champion on social housing issues. So it's going to be interesting to watch the conversation that he wants to lead. But I think I think we are losing a number of experienced legislators who have helped shepherd some of these bills through. So more of that, I think, will fall to leadership of both houses and the governor to help provide that leadership as well while we see this transition. So it is going to be an interesting year for that reason.
Yeah, thank you. And I would just say we are still in a housing crisis yet. It doesn't feel to me like that Sacramento is treating us with the same urgency that we were previously or that we should be. And so
unless I get myself in trouble, by the way, Senator Allen also has been a this advocate and has put on this issue as well. So
right. Yeah, so thank you, Mr. Augusta. I would love to know more when all the bills are fully introduced so that we can, as a board, take a position as we see how these progress. So thanks for coming to us. It's always great to hear from you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Sultan, did I see your hand up earlier?
Yeah, I had a question for Mr. Augusta. AB 1000, which would have added homelessness or housing status as a protected category under Fair Employment and Housing Act. What happened to that bill?
That bill has stalled, but I think we're going to see it's a little early, but I think we're going to see another proposal in that vein again this year.
Okay. Good to hear. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Well, unless there's any other questions, Mr. Augusta, thank you for your time. I appreciate it. It's always a pleasure to see you, and we all look forward to seeing you when you come back.
Well, it's always my pleasure, and I also just want to acknowledge that tonight is my 26th wedding anniversary, and my lovely wife was very understanding that I was coming to speak to you all. So I'm glad that we're ending somewhat early, and I could spend a little time with you.
Oh, you should have told us we would endeavor to be brief.
Oh my gosh! Congratulations! Happy
you.
anniversary! That is
Congratulations.
We're honored to celebrate with you.
Yeah.
Congratulations, Ryan.
Thank you all.
Well, then, good.
Thank you for joining us.
Ellen, get scooting. Go.
Great.
Thank you.
Glad to hear.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Moving on to number 14, board discussion items. There's been a request by Vice Chair Foster, Commissioner Terosis, to discuss possible amendments to the rent control charter and suggestions to the City Council for amendments to Chapter 23 of the City Charter in the following areas. election administration, including aligning Section 1803E with the city charter, modification of requirements for owner occupancy evictions under Section 1806A8, and authority for administration of rent registry for non-controlled units. So, Vice Chair Foster, Commissioner Terosis, if you want to go ahead and say what you'd like to say about it, or I don't know if I don't believe there's a staff report on this to get started, but either of you want to take the wheel.
Sure do. Thank you, Chair Duran. Carolyn,
wait a minute. Hang on a second. You're a little glitchy. You're a little glitchy.
I'm going to turn. That helps a little bit.
Yeah. Yes, it does.
So not since 2010 have we had a measure addressing any changes or cleanups to the rent control charter. And Carolyn and I, over the last several months, have talked about potential changes that we saw as necessary. A few are cleanup, good governance matter, and others are more nuanced and current trends we see in the rental markets and in our job as a rent control agency, what we're commanded to do in the charter and mandated to do in the charter, which is to preserve current tenancies and to save the renters and landlords of Santa Monica a lot of money. To save the renters and landlords of Santa Monica a lot of money cycle, depending on if it's 3 seats or 2 seats. Currently, if only 2 seats are open and only 2 people qualify, we still have to hold an election for the rent board. The school board and the college board have changed their charters to not have to hold an election if only 2 people qualify for the ballot. So we want to change ours to simply reflect that reality that other entities have and save our ratepayers a lot of money. The other part that has to do with elections is that we would love to hear what Commissioner Sultan and Commissioner Duran and Commissioner Phyllis another night think about extending the term limits from 8 years to 12 years for rent board commissioners. Currently, at the state level, at the city council level, we have 12-year term limits and even voted on recently in Measure TL by the voters of Santa Monica. And we think that it's quite a brain drain to lose people that have perhaps been reelected at least once and would like to continue to serve on this board with that institutional knowledge and experience. And we'd like to see it be made equal to the city council terms. Carolyn, did you want to do the next one or do you want me to?
Sure, I can do the next one.
Okay.
Okay, hold on. Sorry, I just have a few screens open. So the next item that we have here is the modification of requirements for owner occupancy evictions. And so we had looked at the number of units and residents that we are evicting at each meeting, through no cause of their own, just because of the fact that the owner wants to move in, which of course is within their right. But then we looked at how many units we have that are 2 units versus 3 units, how many are currently controlled versus currently owner-occupied exempt. And we thought that it would be wise of us to look at this as a potential ballot initiative to repeal the owner occupancy exemptions for 3-unit properties. Wait, did Anastasia just leave? Anastasia, you still there?
I'm here. I'm here. I'm just having connectivity issues. I'm just trying to keep.
Got it. So, for example, I don't know if it would be helpful. We have currently we have 259 controlled 3-unit properties in Santa Monica, with 211 of them being owner occupied exempt. So that's, 211 properties, 633 units, 42% of our total units in 3-unit properties are exempt. And so in order to look at on a going forward basis, I want to be very clear, not anything looking back, but on a going forward basis, when new 3-unit properties are purchased, to clean that up and provide additional protections against owner occupancy exemptions in Santa Monica. Anastasia, I can't recall, did we want to talk further?
The other one is, so San Francisco and Berkeley, a different kind of owner occupancy, an owner occupancy eviction of a specific unit for either themselves or a first degree relative. Currently, they have to, under our law, they have to move in within 30 days. And if they don't, they have to reoffer it to the tenant they evicted. In addition, they have to live on the property for 1 year. San Francisco and Berkeley each require 3 years, 1 year. I think in the past, this was more of an authentic use. Not that it's not still authentic in many cases, but we are also seeing real estate speculation, potential abuse of this ability. And so we wanted to explore having our law match that of Berkeley and San Francisco and some other jurisdictions.
Anastasia's cutting out, freezing perhaps, but just to clarify, this would change from 1 year to 3 years to comport with our sister jurisdictions, to declare that the person must intend to occupy the unit as the principal place of residence for at least 36 continuous months when moving in, rather than 12. So that was another consideration. And then finally, I think, and most significantly, is this potential of a rent registry. And with the passage of Measure RR in 2010, we extended eviction protections to non-controlled rental units. And we think that rent registration is a logical next step. The city could contract with a rent control agency for this service. We know that the rent control agency is already helping the city in a number of different housing issues. And then a per unit fee could cover the cost of the registration. And if any sort of information and counseling services were needed, we could think about, like, down the line after we establish this registry, if there was anything that we could do to further protect, as a city, all of our tenants, not just our rent controlled tenants. Berkeley also instituted similar requirements in their November 2020 election, which was Measure MM. Other locally situated jurisdictions are doing this. And I think it's particularly important in light of recent court decisions. And I'm sure our attorney could tell us more, but I think she has alerted us that excessive rent charges could be seen, or can legally be seen, as a form of tenant harassment, and are not. Sorry, I'm probably messing up the holding, Allison, but that's correct, right? Yeah. And I think that, we want to be able to just provide transparent information to the public. We want to make sure that natural persons are living in these units, and we have a new rent database that we're about to roll out. We would be very well situated to be able to do this. And I think any jurisdictions that have been adopting rent stabilization are also coupling that with rent registries as well, again, just to make this information transparent. So I'm happy to also have our subject matter experts weigh in if there was anything that we failed to clarify. Anastasia, I just jumped in for you when you froze. And I don't know if there's anything that you had wanted to say about the rent registry, but we could think this could be pretty transformational in terms of habitability, renter protections, information for the public, et cetera.
Yeah, and I think, we saw the state level bill just narrowly miss it, and we hear is coming back for a statewide rental registry anyway. As we all have these citywide and statewide discussions about housing shortages, housing affordability problems, we need to know how many units we have and who's in them and what they're paying in order to have these robust discussions statewide countywide, citywide, about our housing needs and housing affordability levels. And so this would be contributing our city's part to that conversation, both locally and regionally. And we'd love to hear what Commissioner Duran and Commissioner Sultan think about these proposals that we would, procedurally speaking, we would analyze here, discuss tonight what to advance to a next meeting, and then we would have probably public hearings so to get public input. There is a calendar to keep in mind that we need to get these to council by early summer, which is why we decided to introduce it now. And that's how it would work. And then council would, even if we presented them with 6 ideas for a ballot measure, council could take all 6, they could take 5, they could take 4, they could take 0. But it would be presented in the form of a resolution from this body to council. And so I'll stop talking now and hear what other commissioners have to say.
Commissioner Sultan, do you have anything to add at this point?
Anything you like, didn't like, questions for our general counsel?
These all sounded like, sorry, was that me? I can't, there's like feedback. These all sounded like really interesting ideas to me.
Okay, I have a question. I have a few questions. First of all, thank you for doing the legwork. I think these are great suggestions, and it's something that we should consider putting in resolutions to send to the council for their review. But my question is for council, procedurally, or actually for Ms. Condon as well. Procedurally, what would the steps be to get these? I'm thinking with the timing, is it something that we could do this all in one big package, or would it have to be broken down? I imagine that the analysis and staff reports that would be part of this. Maybe Ms. Condon, if you could start, and then if there's any legal aspects that we need to consider, council, if you could then speak.
Yes, well, as Vice Chair Foster said, what the board would do, if you provide direction that you would like us to bring back an administrative item, we can prepare a staff report for you about each of the things that you would like to hear more about. We would bring that back to you probably for the next meeting, and then you could discuss it and decide what you want to advance further and hold public hearings on that. The timing would be that we do need to get things to the council by early summer, because they will then talk about it. They would decide what they would put on, what they'd like to put on the ballot, and they need to have all of that to the county by the beginning of August. So that is basically the process. And so whatever you would like to advance and discuss more thoroughly, you can give us direction this evening, and we will come back, I think, at the March meeting to have a more full discussion about each of the options.
Okay. Well, then, to move it, do we have to do that by a voice vote? I mean, I think we should move it along and get the paperwork done and get a report, and then have another meeting about it where we can do something, can take action on it.
I believe we don't need a motion, isn't that right? Isn't it just a consensus, Tracy, or do we need an actual motion?
I think on this you can provide direction. Ms. Regan, do they need to vote? Well, I think they can just provide direction, correct?
I think that's right. If you want to bring back for us to bring back an administrative item, give us direction on what exactly you want information about, and then we'll agendize that for the next meeting.
Okay. Commissioner Shirosas, Commissioner Foster, you did all the legwork, so what would you like to?
Yeah, so I think what I would like, Ms. Regan, is like sample language that we could consider at a future meeting around the 3 items we discussed: supporting our term limits with the rest of the city, changes to increase the amount of time an owner-occupier must live on the property after an owner occupancy exemption, and the establishment.
Eviction, not exemption.
Sorry, eviction. My apologies. And also the establishment of a rent registry for non-controlled units.
And the cleanup of the elections necessity if there's only the same number of qualified candidates as there are spots.
Right, under the term limits one, yes. Mm-hmm.
And no, did you also want to discuss the 3-unit property exemption? You had mentioned that earlier, Commissioner Trosses. Is that not something that the board wants to also discuss? Just to clarify.
Yeah, I think we should probably move forward with, if we're dealing with the owner occupancy evictions, probably take the first easier bite, which is the comporting our law with what San Francisco and Berkeley are doing with the 3-year period.
Vice Chair Foster, anything you'd like to add to that?
No, I mean, I think we're just reiterating what we gave in our presentation, and we're thrilled that you guys think it's good ideas and ready to talk more about it. I'm anxious to hear what the public thinks and to see fleshed out staff reports. It's going to be great.
I agree.
Thank you for your support.
Of course.
Did we have comments on this one? I just want to be clear because I know we did get some written comments. No public comments, Steve, just Chair?
No, not to my knowledge, not on this. Secretary Ho, were there any public comments regarding this topic item?
No, there were no requests to speak, just the one written communication that was forwarded to the board.
So to be clear, next month we're going to see staff reports on those items. Is that correct, Tracy?
Yes, we will plan to bring that back to you as an administrative item.
As administrative, okay, that was great. All right, thank you so much.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. That then moves us to adjournment. Our next meeting will be on March 10th at 7 p.m. Via teleconference.
Yeah, actually, when do we plan to return in person? And Mr. Mordezai looks like he has a comment on something. No? Okay. Sorry.
No, because every time we've thought about that, Mother Nature.
Like another wave. So just don't mention it.
Right, don't jinx it.
So I think we're thinking that we will wait a bit longer, but we are getting, with the numbers moving the way they are, I think that we're getting close to a point where we could resume meeting in person. So I think we'll plan the March meeting for another video conference, see where things are, and then we can plan from that.
Okay.
We'll probably follow the model that the City Council is doing, which is having the board meet in the chamber and then have the public participate via video conference.
Yes, I agree. I think that that's a good mechanism.
Very well. Thank you for that update. All right. The next Rent Control Board meeting is March 10th at 7 p.m. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Did Mr. Mordezai want to say something because he turned his camera on? That's why I just want to clarify. Oh, okay. Okay. Just checking. All right. I move to adjourn.
I'll second.
Okay. First and a second. Okay. Roll call vote.
Yes. Commissioner Trosses.
Yes.
Commissioner Sultan.
Yes.
Vice Chair Foster.
Yes.
And Chair Duran.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, everyone. See you next time.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.